Hello, my name is Andrew Edlin, and about a couple of years ago I first did a one-man play that I had researched and written about Sir Winston Churchill, best known as the wartime Prime Minister of Great Britain. And we're fortunate this afternoon to have Sir Winston with us here in Fairfield to answer a few questions which I'm sure many people would have liked to have put to him if they'd had the opportunity. And so without more ado, we will introduce Sir Winston. I am very pleased to have the opportunity of speaking to you. I am, of course, extremely familiar with America. I first came to these shores after the South African War, almost exactly 100 years ago, and traveled extensively, giving a series of lectures using magic lantern slides about that particular conflict and my small part in it. I was able to meet with President McKinley, who unfortunately met an untimely death at the hands of an assassin sometime afterwards. This was in 1900. And I also met with Teddy Roosevelt, then Vice President, who of course assumed the duties of President shortly thereafter. I've subsequently met with most American presidents and had excellent relations with many of them. And as many of you will know, I am indeed half American. My mother, Jennie Jerome, was American. And indeed I could, if I had wished, have become an American citizen. Now, I have been given a number of questions here, which I will refer to concerning what I might think about certain matters which are currently going on. It had happened since my lifetime in some cases. I understand at this current time that the United States Senate are considering the impeachment of the current president, one William Jefferson Clinton. And I have been asked what I think of this procedure. And it would be frankly impertinent of me to comment on it in any great detail, as this is a matter for the American people and not for me. But I will say this, that the founding fathers of the American Revolution were far-sighted men, and they designed the Constitution of the United States of America very carefully and with a great deal of thought over many years, and not in haste. And I have the greatest confidence that the system that they created will succeed in carrying out whatever is best for the country. As I have been quoted many times, democracy is not a very good form of government. It just so happens that all of the rest are worse. So we are stuck with it. And that is as much as I will say on this thorny question. One question that is always asked is of what I think of the future. People seem to have been asking me this since I was in my teens, and particularly now on the threshold of a new century, what I think about the 21st century. Well, the greatest threats in the 21st century are the same as those in the 20th or the 19th, in both of which I lived. That is the essential foolishness and greed of both individuals and nations. And to that end, I see the greatest threats in the 20th century being that of the thwarted nationalism, which was my lot to have to deal with, particularly in Hitler's war. And in the 21st century, I foresee that the greatest challenges will be in Asia, and most particularly with China. And so how should one deal with this? Well, the most important thing is what I believe in current parlance is referred to as the policy of engagement. Jaw is better than war. You have to talk to people and engage in a dialogue of ideas to prevent misunderstandings from arising in the first place. The greatest other danger I see is in science, the perverted application of scientific inventions, not for the betterment of mankind, but merely for the aggregation of wealth for a few individuals. I understand you have developed since my time the computer, which we mostly use to break the codes of our enemies, and very useful and wonderful that was, invaluable in fact, and now is used for global communication on something called the World Wide Web, a name I cannot help thinking, which has a somewhat dubious connotation of being stuck somewhere in its periphery and devoured by its eight-legged occupant. However, I am told that this may indeed have tremendous advantages in the spreading of communication and information, and I am quite willing to believe that this is the case. But I've always had a fondness for new inventions. As some of you may know, I was instrumental in inventing the tank. But some of these more newfangled gadgets, such as computers, I had less understanding of. Several times my secretaries attempted to introduce me to a tape recorder, and on giving dictation for an hour and then finding that the thing had not been switched on, I dispensed with this and relied on humans, who I found by and large, despite their deficiencies, to be normally more reliable than machines. Machines will work for a long time, but they are not particularly responsive to correction. And another question that I have here is, who, in my view, was the greatest person of the 20th century? Well, modesty really forbids me to answer this question, perhaps, but I would certainly mention one man who has come into prominence in the latter part of this century for what he has done, a man by the name of Nelson Mandela. Now, he did a very remarkable thing. He managed to become a hero to his enemies. Now, that's pretty difficult to do. And he managed to bring a measure of healing to a divided country by the charisma and gravitas of his own courage. And so now he is as popular with his sometime enemies, the white population of South Africa, as with his supporters amongst the black population. That is a remarkable achievement. And if I could be as popular with those who I had fought as those who I had fought with, I would certainly consider that I had achieved something quite extraordinary. And I see that now, at the end of the century, some of the problems prevalent at the beginning are still with us as ever. In the Middle East, for example, there are new players who are causing trouble. but some of the old ones. And this whole business with Iraq, or Mesopotamia as we used to call it, is called that because Mesopotamia in the middle of two rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates. You're not really interested in this, I know, but it happens to be the case. The whole problem with Iraq started after World War I. It's a kind of an artificial place in any case. And after World War I, the whole of that area was divided up on a map by people with red pens making places. What about this? We'll call this a country. It's really a rather somewhat artificial way of creating national borders. Kuwait was created that way as well. And I prophesied it would cause trouble, and it has. And I said to both the Arabs and the Jews in the 19th century, and then again in the 20th, when I had the opportunity to talk to their representatives, that they must settle their differences now, or they would merely become worse. But let me see. I am apparently running out of time. No, we have a little more time. Oh, thank you very much. Yes. Well, there are a number of other obvious areas of concern. I lost all my savings in the Wall Street crash of 1929. I'm now told that the Dow Jones index has become close to 10,000. I cannot conceive of such an extraordinary level. And if I had managed to live even longer than I did, I would now be a millionaire many times over on the basis of the investments that I once held. However, that is probably just as well that I did not, as I might have not used such enormous wealth wisely. In my experience, few people with enormous wealth do use it wisely. Most that do use it wisely give it away, which makes one wonder why on earth they got it in the first place. But there we are. And there are many people who have, throughout my life, asked me what I thought would eventually happen to the Soviet Union. And I always prophesied that one day it would collapse like a badly built wall, and it did. I'm very gratified to see that, not merely because it fulfilled my own opinions and prophecies, but because it was essentially an evil institution that paralyzed the freedoms of people all over the world, and more particularly in those areas of Europe and Asia directly under its domination. I cannot think of a single thing in the 20th century which has generated more of a breath of fresh air than the dissolution of that sterile and artificial domination. The end of a sad chapter in Russia's history, fortunately only a chapter, and the difficulties they are left with to surmount now, at least they can talk about rather than sweep under a red carpet. So we can look at the end of this century, I believe, with a good deal more optimism than we can look at perhaps the middle of it, when there seem to be intractable and possibly world-devastating problems. And it is an irony to me that when I was a cadet officer at the end of the 19th century, 100 years ago, we argued and commiserated with each other over the fact that we would never see a real war. At that time, it was thought Napoleon was really the last war. That, of course, ended in 1815, and then there would just be small incidental battles of no particular consequence that we might get lucky enough to be involved in. And within considerably less than 50 years, we had the South African War and the First and Second World Wars. I see a similar complacency, perhaps, in the attitudes of people nowadays, particularly in America, thinking that there are unlikely to be any major dislocations of peace in the future due to their paramount military might. A situation not altogether unlike that of Britain at the end of the last century, and what happened subsequent in the 20th century perhaps is a somewhat solemn warning of how things can go wrong. But I've always believed that if one follows the lessons of history carefully, then one can at least get some warning of what might come and the dangers that might occur, and take method to avoid them. I am often asked also as to whether, if I lived now and knew the medical research that now exists, whether I would have thought more carefully about my consumption of brandy and champagne and cigars. I might take this opportunity to tell you that my consumption of these items is much exaggerated, and I did live to be 90, so I can hardly criticize my diet on any real basis. It is arguable, had I not consumed these articles in such quantity, I might have lived to be 120, in which case I might be able to give you this interview, as it were, live in more senses than one. Whether I should have wished to have such longevity is altogether another question. But I think it is a good thing that at the end of this century we do know so much more medically and scientifically than we did. Of course, these things can be abused. Imagine if Corporal Hitler had had access to cloning technology during the war and had chosen to apply this to some of his less savory lieutenants. It might not have been a very good thing. So one always has to be careful as far as one can to make sure that technology is restricted to those who will use it in a sensible fashion and not in any sense abuse it. Yeah, I've lost the thread of what I was about to say, but no matter, we'll quickly think of something. The relations between England and America. The very last thing that I've said when I left office in 1955 to my successor was never be separated from the Americans. And this term, special relationship between Britain and America, has sprung up. I see that in this battle with Mr. Hussein in Iraq, the most staunch allies of the Americans have been the British, and I salute that. I think it is right and proper that this alliance of similarity, broken only briefly during the War of Independence, what you call the Revolutionary War, and quite right too, that's what it was, and the War of 1812. Other than those two unfortunate breaches of amity, we have remained side by side on most matters through a period in excess of 2 centuries, and that is remarkable. Of course, I am enough of a romantic to wish that the breach had never occurred in the first place, but I am aware that that is a point of view that is not necessarily shared on this side of the Atlantic. Yes, I think so. Yes. Well, we might have 5 minutes more, I'm not sure. They can wait. Never mind. As a few last words, I was often called upon to give speeches at my ex-school, Harrow, a place where I had somewhat mixed experiences. but the last speech that I ever gave there was somewhat brief, and it really consisted of telling people to never, 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 never give in. And that sums it up pretty well. In my last speech in the House of Commons, the last words were, never flinch, never weary, never despair. That's a fairly good motto. So to you here in Fairfield, when sometimes there may seem problems or differences which might seem insurmountable, just perhaps for a moment cast your mind back on this century which we are leaving and the problems that have confronted many people, which were altogether rather vaster and of more import than your own, and consider yourself lucky to live in this haven of certainly comparative peace, affluence, and freedom. There are many who enjoy none of these things, even today. And with those words, I think it's time. The limousine is here. Oh, good. Oh, yes, yes. Well, I'll tell the driver I will be out immediately. I'm very glad to have spent this time with you, and if you will unhook me from these various appurtenances, I'll be on my way. Thank you very much.